It's that time of year. Every year we take a look back at the previous year, and it is a look at 2025, the year in review. It's an important year because of so many discoveries, so many topics that we've featured here on Earth Ancients. And I have a great group of friends that I've invited to join me in discussing what happened last year, topics that influenced them, perhaps were remarkable for their disclosure or revelation. And we're going to hear from everybody today in a round robin discussion on these topics, 2025, a year in review. My first guest is Dr. Heather Lynn. We've had Heather on before. She's an archaeologist, historian. She's the author of a number of books, including Anunnaki Revelation, Evil Archaeology, and she just launched a new podcast called The Midnight Academy, and we're going to learn a little bit more about that. Welcome, Heather. Great to see you.
Thanks for having me.
Our next guest is Trevor Grassi. Trevor's been a guest a number of times. He's a research investigator, writer, and a filmmaker, and he is constantly in the news with his research on the SARS technology and the details on that. So welcome, Trevor. Good to see you, buddy.
Thank you. Good to see you again. Thanks, Cliff.
And my final guest is Hugh Newman. Hugh has been on the program many times. He's an author, research investigator, host of Megalithomania. The tours are also a big deal for him. And he's written a couple of different books, Secret of the Mounds and Giants on Record. And he's always traveling. His tours are excellent, by the way. So welcome, Hugh.
Hey, thanks for having me on, Cliff.
Good to see you, buddy. And so each of my guests today have submitted a number of topics that we want to discuss that influence them as influencers. Each of these individuals is an influencer. And we want to start with Heather. And Heather found a really good one having to do with artificial intelligence. And it's basically redating the Dead Sea Scrolls. So Heather, I want you to give us a little overview on that because I found that an amazing topic. And it's really funny because we don't hear enough about artificial intelligence in archaeology because it seems like it's fairly new, but it's not, is it?
No, and it's up and coming, as I'm sure you could imagine. And this particular story was interesting to me because of the possibility that it shows that we have ahead of us for what we could use artificial intelligence for in the archaeological community. Also, some of the risks, I would say, too, because it's not all utopian. So the Dead Sea Scrolls, everybody loves to learn about and talk about, but the problem with them, among other things, is the dating of them. And it's important to know that this discovery, we'll call it a discovery. I'm hesitant to say that we know for sure because, again, it is artificial intelligence, and some people will say, yeah, but how do you know? And could it be hallucinating? But it was a very good study that was published in PLOS ONE journal. It was a project that was ongoing for a while. So a couple of years they've been developing this. Academics at the Qumran Institute, Israel Antiquities Authority, and a few other different people. What they did was they looked at these particular fragments and they cleaned probably about, I think it was 30 samples to remove the contamination. And they dated about 27, they feel, successfully. So what they did to do that was they had high resolution images of about 24 of the ones that they had that were dated, and they were digital, and they were fed then into this model that they named Enoch, fittingly. And the AI, yeah, it's so cool. The AI learned to recognize the microscopic ink traces and patterns and character shapes and things that would be considered invisible to the human eye. So things that maybe researchers didn't really pick up on before, they thought, well, let's see what AI can find out. So it was tested on about 13 additional radiocarbon dated samples that they were sort of pretty good feeling about, but the dates were withheld from that. So it correctly estimated the age of them to about 85% overlap with what they had used the radiocarbon ranges. And so that was how they were able to validate it and kind of say, you know what, this AI is really working. So again, still a margin of error, but it really did add up to the ones that had been sort of radiocarbon dated and confirmed. And so overall, Enoch analyzed about 135 of the scrolls. And so they thought about 79% of the total were realistic, with about maybe 21% or so being too old or too degraded to be able to know for sure. And so it was indecisive. Yeah. So it's really cool because we're using AI now in ways that push back the timeline once again. And that was probably the biggest thing about this, in my view, was the fact that if this is true, if we can rely on this artificial intelligence to tell us about the dates of this, then it does push back the narrative quite a while, and it gives a new way to look at the Book of Enoch, which usually is discounted as being sort of out there and lots of wild and wacky things that so-called alternative communities love to talk about. But they say, well, that was written later. It was sort of added. But what we can now see is that, well, according to the dates, it actually goes back during the Second Temple period, which means that it would have been potentially an accepted viewpoint in their theology, meaning maybe it wasn't so far out. Maybe it was relevant.
I mean, it's so amazing that they use the Book of Enoch because it's an esoteric book, and
Right.
the church fathers removed it because it was just too much for the standards of religion, and for them to use that's really what I thought was an amazing addition to that research is the Book of Enoch.
I know. I thought that was so wild. And it really does make us think not only in like sort of the alternative viewpoints of it, but even mainline Christian apologetics, because the argument is often, well, the books, they've been translated over and over again. They're not really that old. And while that's true to an extent, this kind of sheds light that, well, wait a second, according to the Dead Sea Scrolls, they're much older and more intact. And it's just a little glimpse into what's possible using artificial intelligence to maybe redate or re-understand or kind of just add and push back that narrative timeline and everything. It really makes us question. So again,
Yeah.
still in its early stages, they feel pretty confident about the results. The numbers are amazing, but AI has a great potential in archaeology.
I love that one. Hugh, what do you think of that, the Dead Sea Scrolls?
I think it's really cool. Yeah, I was actually interviewed about that for a popular History Channel TV show you mentioned a little while ago, and there's a lot of good stuff going on. I mean, I'd be interested actually in the Book of Giants that was like part of the Dead Sea Scrolls, because that was much more broken up. That was much more scattered. I mean, I've got a copy of the book, a republication of it. Someone's sort of tried to translate it, but there's loads of bits missing out of it. So, do you know if they're going to be doing that? Because that would be interesting, because that talks about all the kind of all the giants of ancient, the Bible lands and everything else, linking it with the Nephilim and all that kind of stuff. So that would be interesting. But I think there's a lot of other stuff I'm sure, Heather's aware of. It's the whole, they're applying it to LiDAR technology as well. There's a new thing that Irving Finkel of the British Museum came out with, this small one of the tablets, one of the sort of what could be, he believes, could be like a Sumerian thing you press, and it on clay and things like this, and it's actually a part of a language. So analyzing Göbekli Tepe would be fascinating to me as well. But I think you're right that this is like, this could really change things, how we understand these ancient texts, and even decode what's carved in stone at many of these sites.
Yeah. Has AI been applied to any of the tepes, Göbekli Tepe, Karahan Tepe? Have they been using it for any of the sculptures or some of the symbology?
Not yet. No. But this is something we could probably get into. I think Martin Sweatman may have touched on it when he was looking at trying to, work out the calendrics of Pillar 43 and other such things. But I think there's a whole, I mean, considering so little has been uncovered there, I'd like to see more come out, and then you can do some analysis. There's so little to work with at the moment. It's kind of bizarre. But I think, I think there's a connection personally between the Book of Enoch and these sites in Tepeler as well. I think Andrew Collins has written about that. We've talked about it over the years, and it could be like the missing kind of chapter of human history that kind of helps unlock all this stuff if they crack on with the excavating, that is.
Yeah. Trevor, what's your impression of this discovery?
Well, this sounds really interesting to me. It's kind of the first I'm hearing about these new studies on them, but I've been very fascinated with the Dead Sea Scrolls and the Nag Hammadi Library, all of these, and especially the Book of Enoch, that I think is very important. I've been seeing all these connections between, what they call the Watchers in that book, and like you saying, the Nephilim, some of these early cultures tied to giants, things like that. I see a parallel between that and the Egyptian Shemsu Hor, which were like the offspring of the gods and humans, hybrids basically. So yeah, it's very interesting. I'd like to look more into it, but haven't really seen much about it yet.
Yeah. Heather, you mentioned in your tidbit on the actual discovery that they had the AI train on known civilizations. What were the two civilizations that they were keen on?
The known civilizations were
The artificial intelligence was keen they had it train on two different kinds of dialects, Aramaic. I think it was something
Yeah,
else too.
Aramaic, and then I believe I just remember the Aramaic, so I apologize for
Okay.
that.
So
There
they,
was
Yeah.
the
how do they feed
Sumerian.
that?
Was it
They were doing
Sumerian?
this. Yeah, they were doing some Sumerian stuff as well. They were like looking at many of the old tablets that had been broken, and they were actually using it to piece, like when the whole kind of Iraq and all that area was being kind of excavated, looted, other such things. All these tablets were all broken. They were picking them up and going off into different collections, But luckily, most of them are photographed and available to look at least. And they started putting them back together using AI. So they've actually
Hmm.
used it to actually sort of rebuild and try and work out what they were actually telling us. So there's a lot of that going on as well.
Hmm.
Yeah, was that I don't know if that was the Enoch one, but maybe it was. I have to check. But yeah, they have done that with the cuneiform, and it's amazing because there's so many cuneiform tablets left to be translated. And right now there's only, I mean, there's so many in museums that haven't been translated, and there's the estimates are about what 500,000 that are currently in a collection that we just don't really have any answers for. And so there's not a lot of people that are able to properly translate them, that even if we had so many people trained, armies of them, it would take just decades for everybody to do this. And so that's something that artificial intelligence does offer, is the ability to condense that labor into something much faster. Again, though, always with that stipulation of it's not perfect. There could be problems, and that's something we always have to consider, but the possibilities are endless and fascinating.
Do you think, as an archaeologist, Heather, that the academic community is holding their breath on AI and they're waiting for some kind of greater validation, and not really saying, yeah, we hear what you're saying, we read about it, but we're still on the fence?
That's a very good question. It has been my experience that it's split pretty evenly with people who are very much against it and very much for it. And so there's pioneers who are out there like let's go people, let's do this.
Yeah.
But there is still a lot of individuals who are afraid. But and I will say again with the caution, they people should be concerned the ethics involved in this sort of thing. But it has been my experience that that's not all that is the problem. The problem that I've heard from people is that they're really feeling threatened, that their jobs are being threatened. And
Oh,
so that's another element of it that may, while are these ethical concerns, you can hide behind that sort of moral veil while you're really just worried about your own career. And that is something that I've known people on an individual level to be worried about because, as we know, AI does have the potential to really replace a lot of humans. And so that's a big concern. So you'll see, I'm sure, a lot of pushback, but the
yeah.
pushback is about self-interest and not always about the interest of the field and the discipline and the discovery itself. But, so
Okay.
same old story.
Someone who gets a degree in anthropology and goes on to become an archaeologist, how is AI going to replace that person? A field researcher, a field study person? I don't see that. Maybe bookworm type of, in studio or in research environment individuals. Maybe that's what you're referring to as a
Oh,
potential
yeah,
loss,
absolutely.
job
Absolutely.
loss.
But for sure, because most of the job that's actually done by archaeologists is not on the field, or in the field. It's in the lab or it's in the research after the fact. And so there's many people who work as professors and in the academic industrial complex that are concerned about that. And they also have unrealistic concerns too, like perhaps it will be automated. Maybe there will be digs that are just done by, I mean, it's just more of a panic. And I think a lot of it's based in fear of the unknown.
Hmm. It's a good one. Yeah, I look forward to seeing more on AI in 2026. Trevor, I want to talk a little bit about the Hawara Labyrinth that we basically touched on when you were on the program. What's the latest and what can we hope for in 2026?
Well, it's a very, very exciting prospects for Hawara, which is for people who don't know, this massive underground complex about 90 kilometers south of Giza in the Fayum Oasis. That we were told all throughout history it was this extremely important, enormous structure underground that Herodotus was speaking about in the 5th century BC onward into past centuries, where eventually it was kind of determined that it wasn't there anymore up until 2008 when a couple teams had done work there and proved that it really was with GPR scans. And 2025 was the big year for it because Louis de Cordier just came out with this scan from Merlin Burrows which was showing way more than we had seen before. And it was well timed with the Coffer Project and their scans of Giza. So it reignited the interest in Hawara, and now Lewis is actually working to put together a project to basically restart what he had been doing in 2008. So, sorry, this is very exciting because he's starting to pull together all the people that are required to actually get a real address of water damage, which is the big issue there. So that's part of it, but we're waiting to hear what's coming in the next few weeks. So
Now, one of the
he's going to
scans
be putting out a paper about it.
One of the scans showed this omega sign, and I forget what level it was on. But does Herodotus speak about that portion of the labyrinth at all?
Not directly. It's kind of a big canal or like a moat around the entire structure as he
Yeah.
described it. But yeah, we think it's potentially, I don't know, we have to wait and see and get down there pretty much to see what it is.
Okay. And what's the feeling of the antiquities department? We know that Zahi Hawass has disavowed knowledge of the Hawara labyrinth, among other
Yeah.
anomalies in that part of the world. Has that changed at all?
Probably not for Zahi, but for the antiquities department in general, maybe. It sounds like some of them are open to it, especially if it starts the preservation project. So it feels like things are shifting, but it's still very difficult to get the permits as it was back in those years.
Right. Heather, as an archaeologist, have you had a chance to look at that labyrinth, the photos, the scans, the SAR technology behind the research?
Yeah, and I think they're amazing and impressive and also frustrating for those reasons that you just stated, because it's like, let's go. But yes, there's always those circumstances aside from Zahi, and it's just always a factor of getting the locals involved. And archaeology is an inherently destructive,
That's true.
activity, and and it's very political too, even if it's not meant to be. It just has that. There's a lot of implications for the things you discover, who discovers it, who takes credit for it, the
Yeah.
possibility down the line for tourism. It's a whole can of worms. So I can understand, but I don't love it. And I just wish that everybody could say, let's just do this. Let's look, find the truth, because it's very impressive.
Yeah. If it,
Well, I could say also it's the one of the big goals that we want to achieve there ideally with Lewis is to reroute the canal all the way around it. That's one of the initial like there's kind of temporary fixes you could put in place to just stop the water from leaking in, but if we want to reroute the entire canal around the side of it, which would be the ideal permanent fix for most of the flooding, combined actually with like planting a lot of grasses in the northern area where this water's coming in from that side, it would hopefully stop all the leaking in so that if it was drained, we could access it without it instantly refilling. But to
oh,
move the
right.
whole
Yeah.
canal would be a very expensive project. So that's one of the big things we're working on right now is trying to raise probably a couple $1 million at least to be able to afford all that labor. But if that part of it got started, I think it would lead onward towards excavations and getting to see all that stuff that's down there.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that is always the question too, is the funding. We always want to go and see these things and see all these projects happen, but it is a question of funding, and it is very difficult to convince people that this is worthwhile. So it's unfortunate. I
Yeah.
can't understand it, but again, everybody has
Yeah.
their priorities. So
Yeah.
Well, there's a lot of the that's part that William Brown and I are helping trying to help raise the funding to help Lewis because Lewis has been doing so much work there in the last year to set this all up, getting all the right people involved. But
Mm.
I've also been talking I've been talking with him about being careful how much we say about the project so far, but that's why I mostly am just saying I'm very excited. I just talked to him actually minutes before this broadcast, and he said that we're probably within a week or two, he'll be able to release this document, which when I read it, I was like, I was emotionally reacting to this, reading this because it was so amazing. All that he had pulled together, all the right people, equipment. So yeah, I think it looks like it's got a very good chance of succeeding. We do have some funders very interested that sound pretty promising. So most of the pieces all pretty much look in place. I feel like that's about as much as I could say now, but I'm hoping we can reveal a lot more of that in the next couple of weeks.
me
Hugh,
too.
you've
That
been to
sounds
that part
great.
of the Egypt. What is your impression of that area?
I've been to Hawara a few times. Yeah, that's. I mean, it's a very strange place. It's somewhere we always want to go. And going inside the pyramid's really cool as well because it doesn't look like much on the outside. It looks kind of battered and ruined and everything.
Yeah.
But you go inside it and you've got this beautiful rock cut kind of channel going down, like a passage going down, and then it's all flooded now. But the chamber there is incredibly impressive. But I mean, we've always been there and just speculated. We've looked at all the old kind of labyrinth maps of Herodotus and other people and speculated about it. So if they can get down there and have a look, oh my God. I mean, it's going to be flooded, right? I mean, the whole thing. I mean,
Yeah.
and not just the sand. I mean, you could just see the amount of sand that's built up there as well. So anytime they go in anywhere, it's just going to fill with sand or water. So it's going to be a complete nightmare. They're going to need millions to do anything there, I think.
Yeah. Heather, are we ready for a Pleistocene Ice Age advanced culture discovery? Is it time to consider not Atlantis? It doesn't have to be Atlantis. It can be another, pre-dynastic high
I
civilization.
I think we're overdue. I think that we're going to find that for sure. And yeah, Atlantis. I mean, if you're thinking Aquaman and mermaids, no. But if you're thinking Plato's Atlantis, yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah.
So no, no, no. So I definitely think that we're, especially with Göbekli Tepe and everything that's going on out there. I think I deal a lot with the Sumerian, of course, and they're like the first civilization and the first this and the first that. But are they? Are they the first, or are they just the
Yeah.
re-civilization? Are they just what we have found? So I suspect that, as it with many things, it's going to be pushed back even further. And the more we find out about Göbekli Tepe, we're going to be shocked. Maybe we won't, but they will, because that's been
Yeah.
the narrative forever. It's like this is the first, this is when history starts, etc. But it's only because that's as far back as we have been able to excavate or know. But yeah, we're bound to find something, at least in my lifetime, I'm hoping. But
Oh God, I hope so. Yeah. Hugh, that leads us to you on Karahan Tepe. You have been reporting some amazing discoveries. It seems like every week there's a new statue, there's a new symbol, there's a new dig that is being uncovered. Talk a little bit about Karahan Tepe.
Yeah, Karahan Tepe is the kind of the place that keeps on giving. Everyone knows it as the kind of sister site. It does though, honestly. It's like I've been going there when there were just little tops of T-pillars sticking out of the earth. And so yeah, so to see it slowly get uncovered like this is astonishing. I've got to be honest with you. I was there recently for the winter solstice and I witnessed some of the new enclosures. We witnessed the winter solstice alignment again. We had a beautiful sunny morning to experience that. We're worried because a new roof's going to be built over it at some point this year, which could block it. So we're waiting to see how that's going to develop. But yeah, you talk about civilization. I mean, the elements that are coming out of Karahan Tepe and Göbekli Tepe and Sayburch and these other sites in the whole what's called as the Tepeler region, which go back to 11,600 years old, does suggest it is a civilization, at least. I mean, I call it a super civilization, have done for ages, because it's a different type of civilization. Because, the word civilization has issues. I've been discussing this with JJ and some other people, and I've been started writing about it because it has to be redefined, I think, the actual word, because of discoveries coming out of southeast Turkey and earlier dates of other places that are now coming to light. Because they may not have had a written language, which is part of the civilization idea. They may not have had, specific elements that Sumerians or the Egyptians had, but they had other things going on. There's evidence of advanced geometry and metrology, ancient measures, sophisticated building techniques, many, many other things. There's even evidence of early air conditioning at Navali Chori and things like this. And so there's elements of very high civilization, high culture at this time. And as just as Karahan Tepe is an example, as that keeps getting excavated, there's a whole. For example, they found this giant square room that was there all along, just buried, and it's beautifully cut. It's almost like something from the Sumerian civilization or Egypt. It's got these beautiful rock cut benches, steps going down with these pillars in certain areas. And it doesn't look like Tepeler. It doesn't look like it's from this culture. It looks like it's something completely different. But because it's at the lowest level, it's in the bedrock as such, it must be that old. And so this is like Heather said, this is like the tip of the iceberg. We're really starting to see. And I think what Irving Finkel brought up with this small tablet that's been known about for years could have been, a press you kind of put into clay as part of a kind of seal. That could suggest that as more discoveries get made, we are going to find the classic idea of civilization at these sites in time, but we just need more time to, find that as it gets unearthed. But there's more and more human statues. There was a whole load of discoveries that came out in November 2025. There were beautiful, this head and this body that was attached to it from Saybirch. There's more evidence of, some of the tools they were using and the scepters and things like this. There's more of these hundreds of these stone plates, beautifully cut shaped stone plates have now been discovered. This whole cache of them was found at Karahan Tepe in what's called the kitchen. And they're now actually, they're going to do more at Göbekli Tepe as well. There's been a bit of delay with Göbekli Tepe because they've been doing a lot of infrastructure and laying out new paths, building a new visitor center. There's a lot of controversy about that. We heard about that, over the last year or two, but actually they've now done most of that and they cleared the olive trees out of the way. And there's a whole area they're now looking at to excavate starting hopefully this year, if not next year. And so, so it's all happening. And I think people, as Heather said, they're going to be blown away consistently over the next decade at least.
Have they found a gravesite, a burial of or have they even identified it was a king or a ruler or an important individual in any of those areas?
Described like that, no, but they have found, like, for example, the recent announcements from Saybirch, for instance, they found in the southern area where all the kind of dwellings are, and also the sort of smaller, well, actually some quite large enclosures as well, big T-pillars. They found actually in the walls, they found caches of bones and skulls, like from different people, as though they were burying kind of underneath the site, which is a tradition you find in Turkey anyway, but also in the walls as well. They found, like, also at Sefer Tepe, they found, which is near Karahan, it's a little bit younger than Karahan Tepe, but they found again a cache of skulls. A site called Cheanu, they found the skull room, it's called, which is possibly where they found actually human hemoglobin there, suggesting they could have even been sacrifices or something similar. And so there are elements of it, but not giant tombs like you find in Egypt. There's no big sarcophagi or anything like that. But they might find it. I mean, this is the point. You got 5 to 10% of the area having so far been uncovered in total. So stuff could be found that kind of fits in with that.
Yeah. Trevor, what's your impression of Göbekli Tepe and Karahan Tepe?
Well, it's really interesting. I've been following all Hugh's announcements and discoveries there. I really like the conference presentation you gave at the 2 years ago. Actually, we were talking about it. It's interesting too that my friend Tom Rue is, I think, hosting a conference about Göbekli Tepe in April or around then, I think, which sounds very interesting. She's going to have Dr. Schock there. And it reminds me also what we were talking about before with the AI and stuff. And Irving Finkel, they were both talking about what were potentially the first written words at Göbekli Tepe. And that was a paper written by Schock and Manu Safezadeh a few years ago. It sounds like some things that Irving Finkel is talking about are also suggesting some of the world's first languages at Göbekli Tepe. So I think that's another very important aspect of it. Not to mention the whole idea that it was intentionally buried, which I know we were talking about as well, Cliff. That idea that they had some foreknowledge of coming cataclysms and prepared for them is very, very interesting as well. So yeah, I'm loving seeing all this new stuff coming up now, but hoping this year we'll see even more.
Yeah. Heather, have you had a chance to get out there, or have you had a chance to study some of the statuary that's been coming out of these places, this Göbekli Tepe?
Not in person. I haven't been there yet, but the absolutely the statuary, the different finds are amazing. Some of there's just so much, but I really think that the thing that's been gripping me has been the potential, the thing you mentioned about Irving Finkel, the potential for there to be that written language, maybe like something before Sumerian, and the fact that the little, like a cylinder seal, it's not a cylinder, but maybe the seal, we'll call it, that Irving Finkel referenced, that hadn't been looked at more closely, that was just sort of, not bigger news, was surprising to me. But no, I've been following it, and it's been really just a little overwhelming in some ways, because there's just so much that could be. And it's just like, I think the new frontier right now of discovery, which I know that sounds a little hyperbolic, but it really is. And so many things claim to rewrite history or change everything we know about history. And, things do have an impact, but I think this would definitely rewrite history.
I think the dates that they come up with these locations, Karahan Tepe, Göbekli Tepe, and so forth, are still a shock to the archaeological community because it's so far back in history. And it's almost like there's a huge gap between 10, 12, 14,000 years ago, and the Sumerians are 7 to 8,000 years ago. Well, what's going on in between that time period, you know? And
I
so
know
Yeah.
Robert was talking about that. He was saying in their paper they were talking about some of the intermediary languages that ended up with these like proto-runic languages,
yeah,
the Armenian runes and stuff like that. But what was really interesting and why I mentioned AI in connection with that too is because I think the AI, the biggest way it can help archaeology is through linguistic analysis. And one of the things Robert was saying was that it was potentially tied to the Rongo Rongo script at Easter Island. So this is about as far as you can get from Turkey.
Oh, that's an interesting one too, because I too was on talking to our friends at on a television show regarding some of these things and presenting my research into the Rongo Rongo script and how I used artificial intelligence to give a go at translating it and looking at all of those things for my book that's due out next year about AI and this sort of thing. And what I found was, again, early, and I was using a much earlier model, but it was showing connections between Rongo Rongo and Sumerian ever so slightly, but then it had like a third option that it was pulling toward the Finnish language, like very early Finnic language. And so and that's sort of known in little bits and pieces in academia that there is a connection between that high up there north and then that, low. But the argument has been, well, people made it up there and left a remnant, and then that it wasn't sort of north to south or what have you. But part of what I have been wondering, especially with artificial intelligence, but also genomic research, is what is the real story about human migration? We're told very definitively that, this is where we start and we kind of all move, or almost like it's depicted as we're one collective group who just decide, come on, gang, let's go. And that nobody diverges from that, or that nobody decides to go back or to different areas. But I think that after some sort of cataclysm where people have been essentially climate refugees and they're dispersed throughout, I think that that paints a different story of, well, then how people may have moved around to survive as opposed to just, decide we're a civilization now and all of this. And I think that kind of thought process, the idea that there was a cataclysm that displaced so many people and sort of shook up the snowball and like we landed where we landed and then had those missing years, so to speak. I think that is really what makes traditional academia uncomfortable because it just shakes that whole narrative up. And now, though, with artificial intelligence and with genetic information, we're getting a whole different look at not only who's been where and how, but how far back that all was. And it's all pointing to very similar things that the alternative crowd has been talking about for a long time.
the alternative bunch. Yeah, you're looking at four of them
Yeah.
right now.
Yeah. A pseudo archaeologist.
Pseudo archaeologists.
Yeah.
I'm just very frustrated. I'm in my research is in the Mayan culture, and the migration story there is the land bridge, the Bering Strait, and it's just so ridiculous when you look at the various cultures who have settled in Mexico and Central America. You have people from Asia, Africa, the Middle East, Caucasians, even some races that are gone that had the long craniums, like the Paracas people are found in Mexico. So I think the whole the migration theory of the land bridge has to be revised. It's just
I agree.
doesn't work anymore.
People
So
get around. That's what we do.
exactly. Hugh, I wanted to follow up. I was at Karahan Tepe last year. Why is it taking them so long to excavate? Because they must have in Karahan Tepe alone. There's like what 20 different underground subsurface temples.
Karahan Tepe compared to Göbekli Tepe is moving relatively quickly, to be honest
Mhm.
with you. Yeah, and you got to like, firstly, you've got to imagine, you imagine like how fragile and old this is. It's incredibly fragile and it's very deep. Some of it's like 20, 30 feet. They got to go down sometimes through solid, layers and layers of rock and rubble and dirt and carefully remove it. So they've got to take their time. But like I say, I was there, just recently, and quite a lot more has been done already. I mean, they only do a few months a year. They only do 3 or 4 months a year,
Oh,
I think, if
geez.
that.
Yeah.
And so, but I think, and also, I just want to mention coming back to the migration thing, because some of the data I've been looking at is to do with diffusionism, if you like, but also extremely early, relating to Göbekli Tepe, travel on boats between Cyprus and that part of Turkey, going back over 13 to 14,000 years.
Hmm.
They found evidence of that because of like certain materials and obsidian and other such things. They found much earlier ones, go back 100 more thousand years with Crete and other islands in the Mediterranean. And so there's a lot to be said for that. And that's completely overlooked by a lot of people. But there was clearly movement through the Mediterranean in other areas by the sea and the rivers and everything else in these extremely early times as well. And I think that's going to open up a whole new doorway into understanding, who the Göbekli Tepe, Karahan Tepe people were. But when it comes to excavation, you've got to remember they've just started excavating at Ayan Lahoyak. This is a site very close to Sayburch, and this is a giant site. Now, we've been investigating this for years. We know the local mayor, we know the kind of local people there. We've seen artifacts, we've had a look around. We even found a Tepeler lying on the ground 3 or 4 years ago. They're still lying there. We checked when we were there in December, and they've cordoned off a bit, and they're going to start excavating there. They're also excavating at Saber, Chakmak Tepe, Sefer Tepe. These are all going already. Harbet Zuvan Tepesse, obviously Karahan Tepe and Göbekli Tepe as well. They're looking at starting a site called Yogan Birch as well, another site we've had a look at that's completely covered up, completely buried. And there's even sites that haven't even started on, like Tasli Tepe, for instance, or Kurt Tepe. There's ones further afield. They're working at further north along the Tigris near Diyarbakir. They're working on Kayanu Tepesi. This is a slightly younger site, but fascinating. And there's a whole load of sites up the Tigris as well, which are out of the Tepeler zone, like Kortik Tepe, Bonchoklu Tala, and all these other areas. So there's this huge scale of operation they're dealing with here. And they keep finding new sites. They found another one called Mendik Tepe, for instance, which is near Sayburch and Chekmak. And so they can't just, I think that what they're doing now is they're getting teams from all over the world. This whole Japanese team has come in to do it at Jan Lahoyak. They've got a Japanese team working at Harbet Zuvan. They've got the German Archaeology Association or whatever working at certain areas. They've got Istanbul. They've got British people coming in. And so the project is massive, and I think they've got to take their time with it, because they've got to create the infrastructure for like a lot more people are going to be wanting to visit these places as well. But let's just see what happens. Obviously, we go back regularly, so we report back constantly about what is actually going on the ground there from family members, landowners, as well as the archaeologists. And I think we're going to be in for a lot more surprises. I think it's going to be revelatory over the next few years.
Before I let you go, Hugh, what is the thinking behind these subsurface temples? Why are they building subsurface?
Well, this is it. This is most of the enclosures at all the sites seem to be
right at the good part.
Hugh!
You
Oh my gosh.
Hugh, you're locked up, buddy.
Oh no.
sounded like it was gonna be good.
Oh, it was suspenseful.
Right in the middle of the good material. Okay.
No pun intended.
There he is.
Cool.
Welcome back.
So can you
Sorry about
finish
that.
where you were at? Because that was really good material. We were just commenting on, you cut off right when we get into the meat of the question, so.
We had a ghostly thing happen. All the electricity got turned off. It keeps happening here. Oh my God, you won't believe stories I've got
waiting
about
for you
that.
to say you got hit by
Uh-oh.
lightning there. And
No, it's just the damn ghosts. Anyway, we were talking about subsurface
subsurface.
areas.
Yeah. Why build
enclosures.
like that?
So most of them initially they cut into the bedrock. The first thing they do, they get to clear the bedrock, and they cut into it and create the shape, create the geometry.
Yeah.
Sometimes, like at Göbekli Tepe, they're quite low. They're just maybe a few inches or six inches, something like this.
Yeah.
And then they would kind of create little bits to sort of shove the T-pillars in and stuff like that. But they would carve down into the bedrock deeply at places like Karahan Tepe and would actually go down, like 10 feet into bedrock and create half an enclosure, from that. Even the T-pillars carved out of solid bedrock. So they do this a lot. This is like part of the tradition. It seems like they wanted to kind of mark the actual space permanently. And you get that with structure A, B, or the pillar shrine. We have all these kind of phallic shaped pillars sticking up with the head sticking out the side, then the whole stone. But all of that is bedrock, all of it. And so that the whole thing is bedrock. They're carving it out. So it's incredible what they do. Why they do that, we don't know. We just can't work it out. But I think they wanted to create a permanent mark on the landscape, especially if they were recording astronomical alignments like they were at Karahan Tepe. And I think it just became a traditional thing for them. They wanted to work with the stone. They wanted to kind of, create this thing, possibly to have water going into them as well for ritual purposes. But it could be many other reasons that we just don't know about yet.
Yeah, I get the feeling that my initial impression was that they were all little mini observatories, and being subsurface allowed them to gaze upward through the T-pillars. And maybe that was the reason that they wanted to do it, because they couldn't do it in the landscape that they were living.
Yeah, I mean the observatory idea is pretty solid in my opinion. Andrew Collins and various archaeoastronomers have worked on that. The archaeologists don't agree. They completely dismiss all astronomy in Tepeler completely. Even the winter solstice thing, which you can literally go and observe it yourself, which I did a few weeks ago. And so, they're denying stuff which you can actually view yourself now very clearly. And so that bugs me. They say there were roofs over everything, so they didn't study the stars. And this to me is bizarre, because we know even like the Paleolithic caves of Europe, they were marking different constellations and things happening in the heavens inside caves like roofs. And so we know that doesn't stop anything, because you just literally step outside the edge and look, and also there would also always be windows and gaps in any roofs anyway, where you would study these things. This is like the Kiva tradition of North America. And so this is one of the big debates. But I think there's something to be said for creating a permanent situation which they then could study from. And I think it was also, these were like universities, these were teaching areas, these were like memory spaces. They weren't just observatories, they weren't just ritual spaces, they weren't just where people lived. I think there was a whole different way of living and thinking that we're still trying to come to terms with and understand.
I thought Schmidt had designated Göbekli Tepe, a few of the locations, as a people that had cosmology. So you're saying that's not accepted now?
Not now. Well, he never really got into the astronomy thing too much, to be honest with you. It was more archaeoastronomers and,
Yeah.
people like Martin Sweatman, Andrew Collins, Guido Magli, and others from Italian University. They're the ones who sort of made these early discoveries, looking more at the stars, the movements of the stars with Cygnus, with Sirius, and other such things. But now the solstices are come to light because of the discovery at Karahan Tepe, the stone head getting illuminated, which is really, to me, that I think that's the most solid one you've got there. And so it's almost you can't really dismiss it because it's observable. And so that's what's so compelling about what's happening now, the way that they completely dismiss any astronomy. All the top archaeologists in the area repeat that over and over again. And so this is an issue. So in a way, we just have to ignore that and crack on with our research and our analysis. And one of the things I'm personally doing with Kevin Esslinger, he's a graphic 3D artist. We're rebuilding Karahan Tepe with the moving night sky from 9 or so thousand BC and getting results, even with artificial roofs placed over it with windows, and you still get the results because they become like really, like portals to see a specific part of the sky. And so this is a really interesting thing we're working on. We'll have to wait and see where we get with that. We may have to get AI involved. There you go. And let's see what happens.
I might be mistaken, but wasn't it Schmidt who he really only said in an interview that it was the first temple? And I think he mentioned that he sort of said that so that he could get more attention on the place. And it's usually one of those safe things you can say in the field, like it's a ritual, like when you don't know, all things are ritual. But then they never seem to want to push any further. It's just like, oh, it's ritual. But then when people do step up and offer the specifics of it, like, okay, well, what does the archaeoastronomy say? What does this site say? Then it's like, whoa, 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 hold on a minute. there's a pushback to that. And so that's kind of interesting.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying. Yeah, because he called it the world's first temple. That was the sort of big tagline that when it was first being excavated in the
Yeah.
90s and early 2000s. But the archaeologists don't accept their temples at all now. They say they're community spaces,
Hmm.
they're structures. They
That sounds like a
and
temple, doesn't it?
yeah, and so what they're finding is back then when Smith was doing his work, they didn't get too far down basically into the bedrock in a lot of places. And so now they found all these smaller structures all around the site. So these are clearly where people would stay, whether they lived there all year round, whether they were domestic all year round. This is what the archaeologists say that they were, but we think because they often had T-pillars in them, in these small square structures, that they could actually be kind of sacred spaces where people would go certain times of year and do things there. It was more ceremonial, it was more ritual. But the work of J.J. Ainsworth, my partner who I'm working with on a book, where her analysis of the symbolism is going to open up a lot of problems for the archaeologists because there's a huge amount of super ancient symbolism. This fits in with Shok's and Manu's work as well, with the old potential languages as well. But there's clearly symbolism related to the movements in the heavens, clearly, and this is what Martin Sweatman says as well. And so I think there's a bit of a divide. It's even getting bigger where even the academic papers that have come out from the archaeologists, they say they're kind of hinting that there's shamanic or animistic elements, there's ritualistic elements, but they also think these were community spaces. They were places where people would meet and have meetings as well as ritual stuff. But they still absolutely remove any astronomy, which is quite frustrating.
I'm amazed to hear that because I thought there was a whole paper written on the cosmology of that area. So I'm sorry to hear that.
Yeah, because you've got Martin Sweatman. He wrote this academic paper. He's from Edinburgh University, and he does statistical analysis. And he published a paper, I think, in 2024. And this broke the internet. Basically, this went crazy, and this really frustrated the people, the archaeologists working.
Yeah.
But it was just his interpretation. But he based it on statistical analysis. So he kind of did it in a very specific, very ordered, scientific manner and got some interesting things from it and published it because he felt that there was something going on here. But similar things have been found earlier than that now, going back into the Paleolithic, something I've been looking into, where there's evidence that many of the Paleolithic people had some of this knowledge and it came through into the Tepeler era. There's clearly something going on there as well, which is usually heavily overlooked. And so there's a lot more to it than meets the eye. And I think, but you also have this Italian, Guido Magli, from an Italian university. He published a paper as well, an academic paper on, the movement of Sirius and the orientation of the temples at Göbekli Tepe. But that got kind of disputed and dismissed. Likewise, so does Andrew Collins' research, likewise is Graham Hancock's and mine and JJ's and pretty much everyone else's. But to be honest with you, I think the paradigm is shifting a little bit, and the alternative researchers, whatever you want to call us, we're genuine. We're not making up crazy, ridiculous claims. We're very sensible. And I think people realize that now. We're not we're not just trying to just influence people and come up with some crazy stuff to get attention. There are discoveries that are things that are really interesting, which anyone can see with their own eyes.
And like you mentioned too, though, that people have been painting on cave walls the stars and star maps for forever. And so it isn't so far-fetched to think that people who are that advanced have that sort of ability to have architecture and ritual and art, that they were also looking up and having a cosmology. It seems like a no-brainer.
Yeah.
It is a no-brainer. I totally agree with you, and I think this is like where I think a lot of people are now they're thinking for themselves, that they're listening to what alternative people are saying. That they want. I mean, there's a brilliant paper put out by Lee Clare, who's the head archaeologist at Göbekli Tepe, a couple of years ago, about the kind of ritualistic leaders and the special people there, and it was brilliant. It brought in all these different elements and everything else, but just completely excluded any of the astronomy, which is, we think is clearly marked there. And this is something that JJ is going to be putting a lot of research into, and we're going to be publishing that at some point.
Trevor, do you see a problem with the orthodox view of Göbekli Tepe, Karahan Tepe, and what independents are discovering?
I see a clash in some sense. Yeah, like he's describing, they are kind of ignoring a lot of this astronomical evidence. And I was going to add on also Laird Scranton, another friend of mine who's done really good work with linguistic analysis and looking into some of these early symbols. Some of them at Göbekli Tepe as well, where he's seeing connections potentially even to Hindu mythology and Ganesha and things like that. So I think yeah, I don't know. There's been a lot of talk about how there's been suppression of the excavation of some of the sites in Turkey, which means, Göbekli Tepe is going very slow with the excavations. But yeah, I think they're kind of sidelining and ignoring some of this stuff like Hugh and the other people are bringing up. So I think in general that astronomy has so much to do with the entire ancient world in Egypt and Turkey, everywhere. And I think I really recommend the book The Case for Astrology by John Anthony West, because I think that really ties back the idea that basically the astronomy and astrology both go back to basically before written language, it would seem, as far as we can
Mhm.
see. They go back to Sumer and to the very beginnings. So yeah, I think the astronomy needs to be more taken into account with it, I'd say.
Yeah, Heather, what is going on with the orthodoxy with Karahan Tepe not being, in their view, a cosmological culture? Is there a certain markers they're not meeting? Is it they can't reference it because it's so old? What's your feeling on that? Because I think it's crazy for them to say that these are not observatories.
Well, I think Hugh touched on it and pointed it out very well. This idea of what civilization is, in like an academic sense, there's sort of a bullet point list of what constitutes a civilization, and so it doesn't have all of those. But that's primarily because people haven't discovered everything that there is to discover there. So as of now, it's not considered a civilization. But again, that is just sort of an arbitrary grouping of criteria that has been used to determine what is a civilization, and it kind of goes back to Sumer too. So having a written language is important, of course, but then having large structures, having a process of education, professions, keeping of time, measurements, medicine, and all of these things have to sort of be, and the arts, of course, but there's numerous things on this list that all have to be present for it to be considered a true civilization. And so that's one of the ways they can get around saying, well, it's just a grouping of semi-settled hunter-gatherers, or they're just, there's so many different ways around it. And while that can technically be true because they're the ones that built that criteria, it does put a limitation on people's perspectives, because it sort of gives it a scarlet letter. Like, well, this isn't a civilization. So, and then the people that are going and putting out the research and saying, but wait, there could still be a language. We're just now discovering it's the tip of the iceberg. It's then easy for people to say, well, yeah, but it's not a civilization. Like, well, no, not yet. But so I think it's the getting hung up on that term civilization,
Yeah.
because we know that there's been proto-scripts and we know that there have been before Sumer large groupings of individuals and families and people and what we would call civilizations who left monuments and architecture and a cosmology, even if we don't understand it. And they're not considered civilizations. So I think it's just the devil's in the details with that.
Yeah. I was thinking they have a couple of wonderful museums in Turkey that highlight Göbekli Tepe and Karahan Tepe. All the individuals that are featured in there are wearing loincloths and bare animal clothing.
Yes.
So
Oh,
they're
that's such a
all
good.
they're all Stone Age. And of course that's easy to
Yes,
fall back on because, if you're wearing loincloths and animal clothing, you're not very bright.
exactly.
And
And
so you
that is a
couldn't.
bias that's planted in, and it's kind of pushed through film and entertainment, and it just seeps into our subconscious where we think, well, these people were prehistorical, because technically history begins at Sumer, because history is where we say, oh, that's the written language. And so anything
Yeah.
before that is prehistory. And so we automatically think saber-toothed tigers and loincloths and people who say ugh. And it's just really unfair to say the least. And so that is a bias. But I think the bias also has to do, again, with the careerism aspect of academia, insofar as there's this viewpoint where we're fighting between the myth of progress on one hand, which is a linear perspective of time, and then this idea that we kind of talk about a lot, which is the time is more of a cycle-based system. And I think that's a lot where people have the tension, is we want to think of ourselves as constantly getting better and better and smarter and more advanced. And it threatens that narrative when we think, well, perhaps people were more advanced in the past and maybe something happened to them. Maybe there's a cataclysm. I think that line of thinking makes some sense, but if you examine it too closely, it may make you have to reckon with your own mortality and where you don't measure up. And I think that might also be the problem as well.
Okay, hey, we're at over the hour. You guys want to take a 5-minute break and we'll come back. So we'll head back to Heather. Heather has a fascinating article that she presents where they found the body of a old kingdom individual and actually researched the genome of this individual. Talk about that. That's fascinating. I haven't heard a great deal of that kind of research where they're looking at the DNA of a body, probably because they can't find enough material,
Exactly. No,
Yeah.
that's exactly right. So that was published last summer in the journal Nature. It was a collaboration between Francis Crick Institute and Liverpool University and a University of Aberdeen. And yeah, what they did was they went in to look around at what they already had in a holding. So it was a body that had been buried in a clay pot. So that's part of the reason too that it was able to be used for a specimen. So they had the original excavation was in 1902 by British archaeologists. So kind of interesting because it's a way that people have been able to now with new technology go back literally into their archives and get new information from those old specimens. And what they did find was that this individual, they were able to extract the usable DNA. As you mentioned, it's really, we think of Egypt as a place with all these mummies and an ability to have all these bodies. So surely there's some sort of usable specimen, but it's just not been the case. So this was the first time that they were able to get something usable. And not only that, but they actually laid out the entire genome. And what they found was surprising to some, not surprising to others, as is usually the case. But what they found was that evidence of the individual's ancestry put him at 80% North African ancestry, Moroccan and areas as about, and then 20% Mesopotamian and Fertile Crescent. So that was the big sort of discovery in that regard, because it was thought that, of course, there was interaction at some point, particularly during this Old Kingdom period. Cuneiform is starting and everything is just, we're heading on, like with that quote, civilization. But there wasn't any hard evidence really to put the two together. I mean, as we've said, people move, people get around. They share their cosmologies, they share technology, but there wasn't enough evidence to satisfy the community of the mainstream archaeologists to suggest that there was, in fact, any sort of communication between them. And so not only did we find that, no, this is clear, that it goes back thousands of years, that the genome shows that there was an ancestor potentially much, much longer than what they had originally suspected, indicating that, like we sort of mentioned earlier in the broadcast, that people have been on the move and they've been interacting, sharing stories, sharing cosmology, sharing DNA. And the human migration story is far different than what we ever imagined. The male was in really good shape. What was interesting too, I want to say about his burial, he was in the sealed ceramic pot and placed in a rock cut tomb. And that is kind of unusual because he wasn't anyone, as we would think, important for that time. They did an analysis to determine he was about 5'2", probably between, they gave a nice big age range, probably between about like 44 and 60. But the lead archaeologist looked at it and thought, let's say closer to 60, because the skeleton had a lot of osteoarthritis and some joint problems. And there was a bone spur in the back of his head showing that he spent his career looking down a lot. It was the same joint, the same bone spur that they have started to find in teenagers and young people now because they're looking down at their phones. And so it shows that he was looking down a lot. And so aside from the fact he was looking down and some of the underdeveloped muscle evidence for his forearms, but that he was using his arms to move up, they took all of this data and then, of course, the pot, and thought, well, he most likely, their best hunch was that he was a potter. Now, why he still had such a relatively unusual burial for that type of person at the time is still a mystery. But they were able to find a whole lot of information about him as an individual, and even go so far as to make a recreation of what he looked like. So literally just giving him a face. But the fact that he had that 80% North African Neolithic ancestry, in Morocco especially, but then that 20% Eastern Fertile Crescent, and that includes the Mesopotamian region, so like Iraq and Iran, but also Syria, and then Palestine in those regions. And so, very interesting. I thought this is another one of these frontiers where all of the evidence is going to be hard science based, and the mainstream's not going to be able to keep it up for too much longer.
And what was the age of the burial or the bones? Do we have that's Old Kingdom for sure. So that's
The specimen itself was they think about 4,500 to 4,800
mm,
years old. It was radiocarbon dated to 2000. It was I think it was radiocarbon dated between 28 and 2,500 BCE.
mm.
So
I love that. What do you think of that, Hugh? He's looking for data.
Sorry, I lost my mute button. It just couldn't
I say
find
he's
it.
speechless. That's what it is.
No,
Exactly.
I think that's super cool. I mean, the fact that this is like proper kind of analysis is now being done on these kind of people is the way forward. I would love to see that kind of thing done with the Tepeler skeletons they're finding. They're now finding the bones, they're finding the skulls. They've actually known about stuff there as well for quite a couple of years or 3 years, and they haven't done. Nothing's come out about it as well. So I would be intrigued, to find, if they're going to find connections between places like Egypt and ancient Turkey, because there's some very old sites in southern Egypt as well. And so I guess we've got to wait and see, what happens with all that.
Do you know, have they found any teeth there that were in good condition? Because that's where the best
Certainly
teeth
found some skulls. Yeah, they found skulls. Whether I assume there's teeth on them. Yeah, I mean, I've seen photos from Saybirch, for instance, and also at Cheyenne, they've had them for years as well, where they found a whole skull room. And so I assume they're going to have teeth, and I'm sure analysis could be done because they're preserved. They're there. They're not like rotten away. So, but yeah, maybe there's stuff in the pipeline. Maybe there's stuff being analyzed and researched as we know. But I guess again, we're going to have to just wait and see, when they eventually publish and present that.
super cool.
Trevor, what's your feeling on that skeleton, that discovery?
That sounds interesting. I haven't heard anything about that yet either. I'm wondering if I just missed it. I didn't hear if you said where that was found exactly in Egypt.
It was found in like 1902 by British archeologists
I mean, where?
in New Iraq.
New Iraq? Oh,
Yeah.
I'm not sure where that is.
It's about 200 and some kilometers south of Cairo.
Okay.
So it's an older site. Like it said, this was a specimen that they had like literally in their basement of a museum that they pulled out
Yeah,
and tested. So
interesting. It
yeah.
sounds very interesting. I had a friend who's been doing analysis on human hairs, some of the hairs that were found on some of the mummies, and she could find all different kinds of information about this person just from a single hair, which is fascinating research she was doing. But I haven't heard too much about analysis like this of different mummies. So
Yeah, it's the first complete genome ever sequenced from an ancient Egyptian. So
cool.
I love that.
yeah.
Yeah. It must be
Awesome.
expensive. Is that a very cost prohibitive kind of research,
It
Heather?
is. It is definitely. So, and it
Yeah.
takes highly specialized materials and labs to do it too.
That's probably why we don't see more of it. It's
Yeah.
funny.
Well, that's like the one mummy that William Brown and I have talked about a lot. He's my friend I've been working with at Giza, and there's a mummy that was pulled out from the village of Nazlet El Saman in this illegal excavation. It was a huge controversy. All these people ended up dying down inside this shaft that collapsed in on them. But eventually they pulled out this mummy from that chamber, and I really have been wishing we could have done an analysis on that body because people were saying it was very unusual, and I think a genome reading would have been pretty enlightening to see for that one. But yeah, glad they're doing it to some anyway.
I want to see more of that kind of research. I think it's fascinating. I want to touch on synthetic aperture radar in this discussion. This is something that I thought 2025 was kind of a highlight, kind of a new data release. And what's the latest, Trevor, on the scans, not only at Giza, but at Hawara and everywhere else? Because I'm waiting for it to be more accepted. I didn't know the military was using it and had used it. And it was considered top secret until very recently. But
Well,
what's the latest on this?
yeah, different militaries have at least used similar techniques, if not pretty much the same. But the latest is Filippo's basically said by the summer of 2026 they hope to be done with the whole Giza Plateau, and he basically agreed with me to go to Hawara right after they finish with Giza and make that the next one. But I was actually trying to help him get a distributed network set up so that the computing power is really the bottleneck for him. He can only do, he said with two computers running 24/7, he could only get 200 tomographic images in 1 year. So we wanted to speed that process up and let people contribute their computing processing, their computer processors power to him. But we're working on that. We're going to be in Egypt together in March, actually. He's going to come and give a presentation. But yeah, also he's working to get his paper out about it. So,
Yeah.
excuse me, that'll be one of the next things as well. Hoping to hear about it soon.
I mean, they're calling it the Beyonce Protocol right now, but
Yeah, that was Money Safes It Is term that we all loved it. It
yeah,
sounded like a Mission Impossible movie, which it
I
basically
thought it was
is.
funny that they did that, but it
Mhm.
gives some foundation to this research. It's still so
Yeah.
much in the air.
Well,
Do
I'd also mention just quick is that he's getting, that this had come out a month or two ago too, when Hugh and I were all down at Cosmic Summit with him in North Carolina. He was mentioning that Stanford professor Howard Zebker now has an NDA on the technology, so he's given him the secret sauce basically of the Beyond Protocol to see if he could reproduce it. And Zebker is another SAR specialist, but
yeah.
not associated with him.
I mean, the big problem I see is the three-dimensional renditions. You're taking these
Yeah.
scans and then reproducing it, and that's where the big pushback is from the archaeological community. I mean, when they did the Caffrey Pyramid, they found all these rooms and shafts and canals and things, and it's still not accepted. So
Mhm.
what are we going to do about that? How do we resolve that? Is it just it has to continually be introduced to the community, or what? What do we what's the story on that?
Well, getting a secondhand opinion from another SAR specialist about the interpretation of the data is one thing that should increase the public's, understanding that it is accurate. But I'm mostly looking at the scans themselves rather than the models because there is a difference of interpretation and that's accepted by them. Filippo at one point said he's 90% sure of this stuff. But there's also, recently they added on, it started with two different satellite companies and now it's up to four different ones,
Hmm.
which are all showing the same results. So that also helps.
Heather, it's interesting that we think of SAR. I think of it as the up and coming LiDAR, where we have a functioning tool, but the technician, which is the highest part of the research part of it, has to interpret the data. And same thing with SAR. You have to have a technician interpret it and then reproduce it into a three-dimensional format. I mean, it feels like it's going to happen, but it's not happening in the
Yeah.
way that we had hoped. What's your feeling as an archaeologist on SAR technology?
I think it's just another excellent step up in the evolution of the tools that we have. But like many things, people are hesitant to embrace it because it's the fear of the unknown. There's also that component again with careerism or individuals who they're not familiar with it. They don't understand how it works. So they don't feel they have it in them to dive in or support it. They're wanting to stick to the old methods. You have usually younger people or people who are more interested in pushing new technologies or new frontiers. And that
Mhm.
always is a point of contention between people in like an older setting versus a newer setting. So we have people who I think are hesitant to give up their throne in the ivory tower. They're hesitant to give up what they feel is their expertise, and not just for the power dynamic, but also the skepticism about whether or not it's a valid form of discovery. So we see this with every type of technology. And there also is, of course, the question of energy and cost and the ability to actually read it and do the things themselves. It's a smaller field. But I think that it's just the same story for most technologies that eventually we're going to see more and more people be interested in it, more people start taking it up and studying it. And so, my personal, like, this is a little conspiracy theory I have about this, but my little conspiracy theory about it is that when you have these technologies that perhaps could be democratized,
Mm.
that maybe other people would be able to have, and from the comfort of their own, wherever they are, they're able to help crowdsource and look into the data. I think that is sometimes a problem because again, you're, opening up to the profane that very powerful source of information and power. So I kind of think that it has a little to do with that as well. But overall, I do think that we're going to see it progress more and more, just painfully slow.
I was so blown away by it because when they were interpreting the data, it was like, well, there's shafts that go a mile underneath the pyramids. I'm like,
Yeah.
what? A mile? It just became fantasy land, you know? And because I couldn't see the details, I was like, okay, come on now. Come on, Felipe. I mean, Bioni, let's get in, let's do some refinement of the technology. What's your feeling, Hugh? What do you think the future holds for SAR tech?
Yeah, I think it's very interesting, especially as Trevor just mentioned, there's four different companies are now picking up the same results. I think that's what we've been waiting for,
Yeah.
really. You're getting you're not getting opposing results. It's not contradictory. And Filippo's like a proper scientist. He's not like, he's not in it for like, he wasn't even doing stuff on Giza. He wasn't even that interested in it. He was more, he was doing stuff on, collapsed bridges in Italy and things like this and other such things. That was where he developed it. So I think people need to give him a bit of credence, actually, in my opinion. And I've kind of hinted to them multiple occasions. They haven't taken the bait yet to actually let's go and have a look at Tepeler. Let's look at some underground cities. Let's go into Turkey because we've found this tunnel, which we reported on a year and a half ago. We've found there's underground elements at Sayburch. There could be underground rooms. Göbekli Tepe, I think there is. I think there's evidence of that now. And so I would like to apply that, once they've done Hawara. Hopefully it'll probably take some time with the speed of laptops nowadays. And but yeah, that would be interesting to sort of just throw it in the mix because we know certain underground cities are there. If they could get results that show what's already known, then they could apply it to other parts of Turkey where there's suspected places. And I'd be very interested to see, what would happen with that in that area.
Yeah, they could use that as a cross-validation tool and be able to give more credibility to the technology itself. And then maybe, just maybe, people will be more likely to push for the, I don't know, the excavation eventually of those spots.
Yeah, that's also if we got this distributed network of computing power for him and he could actually scan multiple sites per year. I think we've definitely been talking about a lot of sites in Turkey. I mean, Darren Kuyu would be amazing. But another big one is definitely Cusco, where they're doing the Chincana tunnels. They've been using remote sensing on the ground in the last couple of years. They've found all these tunnels and now they're excavating down to them. If Filippo could scan Cusco deeper from Sacsayhuaman to the Coricancha, he could potentially find some of the deeper Chincana tunnels. And if they come to excavate them in the next year or two, then that would be a further proof that they did actually see what was accurately down there. So
Because I was there in November, and actually we were lucky. We met the archaeologist. We had a thing with meeting with him. We did interviewed him, which I'm going to publish soon. And we got to go in the entrance to the tunnel. We were really like, whoa! I couldn't believe they were letting people in to have a look. And so yeah, there's something weird going on there. But this is the thing about the stuff in Cusco. I want to mention this because people like David Hatcher Childress and all these people have been writing about the mysteries, even going back into the 1800s, talking about giant tunnel networks
Yeah.
under Cusco and throughout Peru. There's all these legends go around, Amaru Muru and all things like this. And so it's like, oh, it's a reality. There you go. Have some of that. And I think that's really, really intriguing. And I think that is that needs to be looked at because, they've obviously been blocked up deliberately when the Spanish came over, potentially to hide treasure. That was the story. So there could be unlimited treasure still to be found as well.
yeah, or artifacts, records for sure.
Yeah, Hugh, talk a little bit about that. That was one of your topics. I had always heard rumors of the tunnel system at Sacsayhuaman, but and also there are people who have reported going into the tunnel to a certain depth and being stopped before they could go any further. But what did you discover when you were there?
Well, we were just shown one entrance. There's two or three at Sacsayhuaman itself. They're kind of behind the main area. It's near where the big kind of circular area is. It's near there, but it's all they've got like little roofs over it where they're excavating. It's all open. It's a public thing. They were doing other excavations there as well. A different team. In fact, my friend Kevin Esslinger was involved in that. This gentleman called Alexi is an archaeologist, and they were digging down the front of the walls to see how deep the walls go. And the main megalithic Cyclopean walls at Sacsayhuaman as well. But yeah, these tunnels are just absolutely fascinating to me. That what I saw, and I wasn't allowed to film or photograph inside it or anything, but what I got in as far as I could without, disappearing forever. And I found you could see it's all collapsed, pretty. There's a lot of collapsing going on, or they were deliberately kind of filled in, and so they got a lot of work to do, in my opinion. It's not as simple as what people make out. I think they having the SAR scan technology would probably help, because there is a debate as to whether this is an actual tunnel going from Coricancha, central Cusco, to Sacsayhuaman, or if it's some other anomaly they're not sure about. So, because they haven't been able to get inside much of it at all. It's that mainly the entrance, I think, at Sacsayhuaman.
Does it appear that it was built into the actual system of Sacsayhuaman, or is it something that happened later?
Well, it's only about 5 feet tall, and it's got this kind of shape. I forget the name of the shape, and it goes. This apparently it's the same kind of dimensions all the way through, and so it looks like it's mainly cut out of bedrock. There may have been a natural channel there they utilized, but they were cutting it out of bedrock. But I think the main type of rock there is limestone, because the main walls of Sacsayhuaman are limestone. So it's not the hardest rock. It's not like basalt. It's not andesite or anything like that. So it's doable. You can imagine even the Inca or the pre-Inca culture, whoever they might have been, could have done it. It's not impossible.
Okay.
I think that's to be looked at. And I think, there's so many traditions of tunnels and entrances and everything else in that part of South America that, it's amazing that it's actually happening. There's actually something going on there now. But I mean, I know Graham Hancock was out there as well. He had a look. He kind of climbed down. He met the archaeologists.
Yeah.
And so that it's all coming to light. But I think it's a long-term project. There's so much to clear, before they can really they can get inside it.
Heather, what do you think of that? Those tunnels?
I think the idea that they have to be cleared is part of the problem as well. I mean, it's a very difficult terrain to have to navigate, but I think that it's definitely something worth pursuing. And I think that SAR technology is certainly shedding a lot of light on all of these different sites. So not surprised at all, but a little bit surprised that more people aren't aware of it, that it hasn't been in the greater news.
Hugh, does it seem like at some point they will open those to the public, or is it kind of like, it's an anomaly that they don't want people to look at because it changes the understanding of their scenario?
I don't think it's going to change much. I think people are aware there's stuff like this there. They were openly showing us, myself, JJ, and Andrew, and a few of our group actually got to go and have a look as well. So there was no secret. There was no like trying to hide it or anything like that. Of course, luckily one of our team, our Peruvian team, knew the archaeologist personally, which probably helped. But I think we're very respectful when we visit these places, obviously. So I don't think it's going to. I think people are aware of this. Whether it gets open to the public, that's a whole safety thing. That's all that's going to come down to. I think. I think that if they can clear some of it, it'd be a cool little thing to do at the at Sacsayhuaman, to actually go like 20, 30 feet into it, something like that. But there is another entrance as well, which is a bit more difficult. Apparently, we didn't get to look at that one. So there's two. I think there's two, maybe even three there, all in this one specific area.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
the liability is a huge concern. I mean, that is something that a lot of sites face that way when they're thinking about possibly opening it up to tourism. There's a lot of liability. So
Or people vandalizing inside of it if they're
yeah,
allowed.
absolutely. Yeah.
Safety is
But
my thought. So
I know, for instance, like several years ago, David Hatch Childers told me about this. I think he wrote about this in one of his early books, that in one of the churches or cathedrals near the Coricancha or the Coricancha itself, there's actually a trapdoor thing that opens up, and you can kind of take steps down into an
yeah,
underground
Oh
area,
my
which may
gosh.
well
Very
have been, so he did it himself or whether it was reported to him, I can't remember. But, there's lots of little stories. If you dig into the old books, you dig into some of the Spanish kind of chronicles and things like that. And even like they were told by the Inca at the time that this earlier civilization had built this network of tunnels previously before them all over the country. And so there's a lot more to it than people realize. But yeah, like I say, getting down there and actually taking a look is a whole other story.
That was one of the accounts I had heard. I was talking with my friend Matt, who just met me in Egypt for a week. We were working on some stuff there. He does the photogrammetry and using 360 cameras and mapping this stuff out. But he's been living in Cusco and he's been involved in the excavations this whole time. He was actually the one who first asked the archaeologists to start digging in front of the Sacsayhuaman wall. And that's when they started doing it, which is amazing. But there was one of the documentaries I'd been able to find about it was talking about an account from a priest that said this, what you just said, that in the Concha, which is now a Christian like cathedral, but built on the ruins of the ancient temple, there were entrances near the altar or something where you could lift something up, go down in. And he actually described this amazing that there was this ancient technology where they would use these very super polished metals as if they were mirrors, and they would direct sunlight coming into the Concha that would actually shine up into the tunnel and go like hundreds of feet or meters even up through the tunnel and illuminate the whole thing, a series of reflecting mirrors of this polished metal, basically. So
Wow.
amazing. This is like, wow. So they could have illuminated the entire length of the tunnel potentially from the sun, just from inside the Concha entrance. Thought that was
That's
incredible.
amazing. That is amazing. I hadn't heard anything like that. Wow.
Yeah,
Very
one of the
cool.
priests in the church had mentioned something about an ancient legend describing that at least. But
That's so cool.
We could talk about these discoveries forever, but we're at the end of our time. Heather, Lynn, I want to thank you, Hugh Newman, and Trevor Grassi. You guys are amazing. Before I leave, I want to ask each of you, what do you think 2026 holds for you? What are you looking forward to? And I'm going to start with you, Trevor.
well, so much at Giza. I mean, I could just list a few bullet points. We just found my friend Stein Vandenhoven had found in 2019, they just confirmed an eastern entrance into the Menkaure Pyramid, which is, I just got a video out about that, is very interesting, amazing new discovery. They're talking about drilling into the large void in the Great Pyramid, sticking a camera in there. There's going to be, by the summer, like I was saying, Filippo expects they should be basically finished with the Giza Plateau SAR scans, and we'll see a lot more of the structures. I interviewed him recently, and he was talking about how he's looking at 3 or 4 different levels of horizontal connections between most of these vertical structures he's already shown. So that's very exciting. We're pushing to start the project at Hawara, Lewis's really, which should be very exciting too. We're going to be back there in March on the tour. And then I don't know, there's more than that even at Giza. There's some other things I can't think of at the moment, but there's a lot going on at Giza, so I'm going to try and be there. I'm very excited actually. Next week, I'm heading down to Mexico and Guatemala to meet up with Marco Vigado, who
Oh, cool. Yeah.
he's so brilliant, author of Empires of Atlantis, this
Mhm.
amazing book. And this is extremely exciting for me. I haven't mentioned this publicly at all yet, but I'll just give a little sneak peek that we're going to head to Piedras next week in Guatemala, which is this site that Edgar Cayce had said had identical contents to the Hall of Records below the Sphinx. He said
Right.
there's an identical hall of these records that had come from Atlantis that's in
Mhm.
Guatemala and is deep in the jungle. It's really hard to get to. But that's one thing I have to mention too, because I've been waiting years to go there, and specifically with Marco, because I believe Marco is the guy who can get this job done. He's done all these amazing projects in Mexico, discovering all these underground Zapotec underworld, Mitla, and stuff like this. I think you've talked to Marco on Earth
Oh,
Ancients
yeah, a
before.
lot. Yeah, you'll have
Yeah.
to come back on the show. Yeah, I just came back from Guatemala. It's really quite amazing. The big plus is that you can climb the pyramids. In Mexico, they're shutting them down. You can't climb a lot, and it makes it difficult. So, yeah, we'll look forward to hearing more about that.
Awesome.
You,
Yeah, thanks
what's
for
the
having me.
story?
Well,
What's going
the
on
whole
with
area,
2026?
obviously, the whole Tepeler thing is like, we're keeping a close eye on that. There's going to be just revelation after revelation, as there has been for many years now. But also, one of the places that I'm going to be going to is Armenia, and I've been wanting to go for many years. This is the Karahan Stone Circle complex. That is something I've been desperate to go to for a decade or so. So that, and we believe that that's an astronomical site. It goes back to 6,000 BC potentially. So that's something we're going to be developing and integrating into our research. But I think with the whole Karahan Tepe thing, I think that's where it's all going to get very, very interesting. And I'm just mentioning Marco Vergato. I met up with him in February out there as well. Briefly, we went to a couple of sites, so that was cool. I mean, and I tell you what, Jim Vieira is going to be really jealous you're going to Piedras Negras, because that he's Mr. Atlantis, Casey.
I've been
So
talking to him about it a lot, actually.
yeah,
Yeah.
but maybe Jim will, you should get him on a flight down there or something. So I think he would appreciate that. But yeah, and
Viracocha.
Vieira, yeah, that's the one. Yeah, yeah. And so yeah,
Yeah.
and there's other things, there's other things that are going to be, developing. One of the things I'm very like we mentioned privately is that I want to, integrate with, more of the archaeologists, places like Karahan Tepe and Göbekli Tepe, because I feel there's, this is what megalithomania was set up for as well, is to kind of bridge the gap, which is kind of getting wider in some cases between academia and alternative researchers. Discoveries are being made by everybody, so let's appreciate that and have an intention to kind of in Egypt and other places as well to, let's all come together a little bit and
Yeah.
listen to each other and bridge that divide.
Yeah. Hugh, before I let you go, give us your contact information and how people can learn more about your work.
Sure, yeah, it's just all on megalithomania.co.uk. Yeah, I mean they can see that we've got the conference coming up in May. We've got a bunch of tours, we've got projects on the go. But mainly just through Megalithomania or Hugh Newman, they can find out everything. Yeah.
Okay, great. Hey, Trevor, give us your contact material as well. I want to make sure people know how to get a hold of you.
Well, I'm just Trevor Grassi on YouTube is where I mostly put my research into the videos there, but I've got opusmagnum.org as well as my site that I've just kind of started getting some stuff up on there because I got it on a private server, so I don't have too much yet, but I'm starting to use that now.
I found a Trevor Grassi is artist. Is that not you that has graphics of photographs and stuff?
Oh yeah, I don't know. I had a page that was like I don't know if those were
Some
Fine Art
great
America.
photos of
Yeah.
Egypt. Yeah.
Yeah, at one point I just put up a bunch of my photos from
Okay.
Egypt, Mexico, Peru, and stuff to see if people might make like 50 cents if people want to use them to try and get some supplemental income. Didn't really work for that, but
Okay.
I do have a
Yeah,
lot of yeah.
that was kind of cool. Heather, what's up for you in 2026?
Well, it's the year of Anunnaki Revelation, so that's my new book
Right.
that's out in a few more weeks, and
Yeah.
so I'll be going around talking about that, talking about the Anunnaki, and presenting some of my work into the evidence that supports that they were interested in psychedelics, and
Uh-oh.
yeah, I know it's a little wild, but
Yeah.
hard evidence about the cultivation of the poppy for medicinal and other uses, and the different rites that are involved as well. So, looking into the discovery that was made too, that was the second largest gold discovery ever, and how it just sort of vanished and disappeared and was looted, of course. But out of that were the famous wristwatches of the gods. So, I was able to locate those. They are since gone. I'm trying to actually locate the physical ones, but I have a picture of what those actually were, the gold cuffs, and how it relates to the Hulgil rite, which was the particular rite, the shamanistic rite that they were using. So a lot of interesting, strange things. I think people will find it to be a little, maybe a little out there compared to some of my earlier work on the Anunnaki, but it also coincides more with this idea of the Younger Dryas and human migration and what it is to re-civilize. And so what it took and a reimagining of what the Anunnaki are. And so that, and of course the podcast, that's my big thing and my big focus this year is really getting a lot of interesting people to come on and share their work and share their opinions and try to bridge those gaps, just like Hugh is trying to do with megalithomania. I hope to do that in this virtual space.
And the Midnight Academy can be found what day of the week?
Thursdays at 6 p.m.
There you go. Excellent. All right, guys. Fantastic. Really appreciate you coming on the program and much success to each of you. And thanks. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks you. Thanks.
Thanks, Cliff. Thanks, guys.
Thanks.